In this world, people can download their consciousness into new bodies. Takeshi Kovacs makes love to Sarah as they clean blood from their bodies. During this, Takeshi imagines another woman. Later, Takeshi wonders about the woman, who reminded him that they were envoys who took what was offered. He then goes to the window while Sarah complains about bone fragments from the cortical stack she's cleaning. She wonders who their targets were, but Takeshi doesn't care. Noticing glitches on the window, Takeshi touches the screen and senses 12 CTAC officers outside. He warns Sarah, but as they arm themselves, the wall explodes. Years later, a man's body is unwrapped from a bag. The worker takes a tube from his mouth, but the man suddenly starts seizing. The worker explains to his apprentice that newly re-sleeved people tend to flop around as they remember how they died. During this, the man recalls how the CTAC entered while Sarah and Takeshi hid. Takeshi sensed how their enemies moved, so he shot into the wall and straight into one's head. He continued shooting, so the rest opened fire until Sarah threw an electric grenade. At present, several workers arrive, but the man easily tackles one as his hostage. He demands to know how long he'd been down, so the workers check his profile and identify him as Takeshi Kovacs, re-sleeved into a new body after 250 years in prison. Later, a lady congratulates him and the other re-sleeved people for being given new bodies after serving their time. She explains how Protectorate citizens are implanted with cortical stacks, which record their minds and store them as digital human freight, or DHF. This allows them to download their consciousness and transfer them to bodies known as sleeves. While their sleeve is replaceable, their stacks aren't. Thus, real death occurs when their stacks are destroyed. As he listens, Takeshi recalls one CTAC soldier surviving the grenade. He battled the man while Sarah grabbed a gun. Before she could fire, more soldiers gunned her down. At present, the warden notes that parts of Takeshi's records are sealed, though he sees that some of his crimes are against the state. This reminds Takeshi of when the soldier, Jaeger, arrested him for conspiring with a known rebel leader, Chris Falconer, the woman he'd been thinking of. Takeshi insisted that Sarah was just a mercenary who didn't know who he was, but Jaeger still shot her stack. Despite that, the file claims that Takeshi destroyed Sarah's stack. The warden continues how Takeshi's military-grade sleeve is provided by Bancroft Industries, making him the property of Lawrence Bancroft. Failure to comply will result in de-sleeving and serving the rest of his sentence, which has no end date. With that, Takeshi soon walks to the lobby, seeing the newly re-sleeved people meet their loved ones while wearing new faces. Christine Ortega approaches him as she'll be driving him to Bancroft's residence. Suddenly, a father complains how their 7-year-old daughter was re-sleeved in an elderly lady's body. The child was killed in a hit and run, and according to their legislation, she's entitled to a free sleeve. However, the worker insists that this is her free sleeve. If they don't like it, they may upgrade or return her to storage. The daughter cries, afraid of returning to storage. Outside, protesters rally against re-sleeving, believing that re-sleeved people won't be forgiven by God. During the drive, Kristen shares how the Archdiocese claims that people who are re-sleeved will go to hell, even if it's to identify their killers. She then asks what Takeshi's crimes were, so he lists that he blew stuff up and killed people. When he claims that some deserve to die, Kristen wonders how he decides that. Sarcastically, he says it depends on what sets him off, which ranges between genocide and talking too much. Currently, he's pissed at Lawrence Bancroft, and Kristen is surprised that he doesn't know him. She claims that Lawrence is one of the first founding Meth just as she drives over the clouds where they see the floating city called the Arium. Meths are affluent people who have re-sleeved numerous times. They've built their homes in the clouds to ignore the world's mess. Soon, they crash land into the Bancroft's residence. When Takeshi teases her landing, Kristen explains that driving isn't her job, revealing her police badge. Takeshi realizes that she's been interrogating him, so Kristen demands to know his name. When he identifies himself, Kristen checks his file and is surprised to learn that he's an envoy, a group who are supposedly extinct. Their arrival alerts Bancroft security and Lauren's wife, Miriam. Seeing her with Takeshi, she accuses the detective of stealing their limo. Before things escalate, a police car arrives with Kristen's partner Samir and Miriam's son Isaac. The mother complains that Isaac was supposed to pick up the envoy, so Samir explains that the kid was arrested for a DUI. After the police leave, Miriam takes Takeshi into the house. Immediately, he notices a songspire tree, which is part of the woman's collection as it's the only one on Earth. The tree reminds him of the envoy's stronghold. Soon, Takeshi meets Lawrence Bancroft. The man notes that he was alive during the envoy's uprising and saw what the supposed most formidable fighting force could do. Takeshi adds how it'd sound better if they didn't lose. With that, Lawrence hands him a book written by Chris, triggering his memory of her. Seeing his reaction, Lawrence is pleased that he got what he paid for. Pissed, Takeshi stresses that some things can't be bought. He highlights that he fought the war to stop people like him, so he demands to know why he was re-sleeved. Finally, Lawrence presents him with a signed pardon from the president of the Protectorate. Using his influence with the UN, Lawrence can grant Takeshi a reduced sentence to time served along with a line of credit. After he completes his investigation, Takeshi can keep his leave or choose choose a new one, and Lawrence will pay him 50 million UN credits, thus allowing him to have any future he wants. All these will be his if Takeshi solves Lauren's own murder. Meanwhile, Kristen is researching envoys, stressing to Samir that they're trained to be combat ready in any sleeve on any planet. They can adapt to any language, culture, and environment while being able to manipulate computers, systems, and people. She wonders why Bancroft re-sleeved a known radical, but Samir doesn't think it's serious. At the Bancroft's residence, Lawrence explains how Miriam discovered him after an energy weapon vaporized his head. He keeps the weapon in a biometric safe that only he and Miriam can access. With this, Lawrence states the obvious: either he killed himself or his wife did. Confused, Takeshi points out that Lawrence still has his stack, thus he can recall what happened. However, Lawrence clarifies that his stack was destroyed, but he had a remote storage backup that synced 48 hours before he was killed. There was an attempted hack on his backup storage, so someone wants him dead. Takeshi wonders if he just killed himself, but Lawrence stresses that he wouldn't have failed if he did. Unamused, Takeshi refuses the job, stating that he'd rather return to storage. Still, Lawrence suggests he recalls what life is like before making his decision. He also gives him Qualcris' book to remember his past. That night, Takeshi sees an illusion of his sister, Raylene. He laments how the rich own everything like Qualcris predicted. Hopeless, he tosses the book into the water, wondering about indulging himself before returning to sleep forever. Later, Takeshi wanders the nightlife and gets high. During this, he starts seeing countless holographic advertisements that confuse him. When he gets in the middle of a wrestling ad, Takeshi collapses. Kristen finds him and gives him a broadcast blocker to block out the ads. She asks why Bancroft wants him, and he replies that it was to handle the case she failed at. Noticing that he's high, Kristen realizes it's pointless to talk now. However, Takeshi offers to start over. At a bar, Kristen notes that she'd learned that Takeshi was the sole survivor of the Battle of Stronghold. She rants about how Lawrence tried to ruin her career when all their evidence pointed to him killing himself. Takeshi reveals that he turned down Lawrence's job, surprising Kristen. He then stands to leave, sharing that he'll stay at the Raven Hotel. Kristen points out that it's an AI hotel that no one stays in anymore. Such hotels are programmed to want guests like a stalker, but Takeshi intends to indulge until he returns to sleep forever. At the Raven Hotel, the AI receptionist, Poe, greets Takeshi. Before they can settle the payment, a man aims a gun at Takeshi's stack. Aware of his status as an envoy, the man, Dimitri, is disappointed that he didn't notice them. As Dimitri takes him away, Poe informs Takeshi that he must pay before he can assist him. The mercenaries knock Takeshi down, but when he looks around, he understands what Poe is offering. Drunk and wounded, Takeshi crawls to the receptionist, but Dimitri continues beating him. Finally, he kicks the man toward Poe, allowing him to make the payment. Suddenly, automatic guns appear, gunning down the mercenaries while Takeshi deals with Dimitri. With expert moves, he blocks the man's advances and knocks him down. He interrogates him on who sent him, but Poe shoots the man, leaving Takeshi with no answers. Soon, Kristen and Samir investigate the incident. They discover that Dimitri is a hitman who makes illegal copies of his stack. Kristen carves the stack from Dimitri's sleeve, but it's too damaged to spin him for an interrogation. Learning this, Takeshi concludes that someone hired Dimitri to keep him from investigating Lawrence's murder. Still, he considers shooting his stack, refusing to live in this new world. However, he hallucinates Qualcris telling him to change things. She insists that there's more to Lawrence's case, and he can use this to finish their mission. Considering this, Takeshi calls Lawrence and officially accepts the case. The next morning, a man and his son discover a dead woman in the lake. Meanwhile, Takeshi wakes up and discovers Poe and Bancroft's attorney, Miss Prescott, in his room. Elsewhere, Kristen awakens and tells her AI device, Hawkeye, to monitor Takeshi's location. During her sparring session with Samir, he hears a beep and recognizes it as a tracker. He reminds her that they don't have a warrant, so he has to report that she's tracking Takeshi. However, he decides not to, but stresses that she'll get nothing from the envoy. At Psychosec, a facility that manufactures high-end sleeves, Prescott and Takeshi are taken to the Bancroft's vault, where the family's clones are kept. The facility provides a satellite to download DHF facilities so their clients can transmit their stacks into their clones for quick travels, known as needle casting. Takeshi questions its security since there was a recent hacking attempt, but Prescott thinks it was just hackers trying to steal a Matt's memory to sell in the black market. Just then, Miriam and Lawrence arrive. They confirm that Lawrence needle casted from Osaka to the vault 6 hours before he was killed. He closed a deal in Osaka, but since his memory of that day wasn't uploaded in the backup, he doesn't remember it. Lawrence wonders why Takeshi needs such information since he can't be a suspect in his murder. However, the envoy clarifies that if he wants answers, he must be ready for questions. Unamused, Lawrence takes Takeshi for a walk. As they do, he warns that if he dies or the case doesn't get solved quickly, Takeshi Takeshi will return to storage. Seeing this as a threat, Takeshi asserts that him working on the case doesn't mean he trusts Lawrence. Meanwhile, Poe joins his fellow AIs in a game of poker, announcing that he finally has a guest after 47 years. They wonder why he still acts like a human, so Poe insists that he's curious about them. The others don't share the sentiment since humans enslaved them. Believing that humans are lesser life forms, they suggest that he starts serving up humans instead of serving them. Offended, Poe leaves. At the police station, Kristen misses the morning briefing, so Captain Tanaka orders her to handle a case about Mary Lou Henchy, whose body is missing. With no choice, Kristen talks to her grieving mother, Mrs. Henchy, who demands that they release her daughter's body. Since Mary Lou converted to religion, she can't be re-sleeved, so Mrs. Henchy can never talk to her again. In the Raven Hotel, Takeshi and Poe watch the death threats against Lawrence. Takeshi eliminates videos based on their contents, the location of the sender, and police records. Following Colchrist's advice on how violence is often personal, he zeroes in on a man who seems to be avenging someone named Lizzie. By checking the serial number on the man's rifle, he identifies the suspect. At a slum area, Takeshi sees posters of a Colchrist display at a museum. He then moves on to Elliot's data brokerage, but when no one answers the door, he smashes it open. The owner, Elliot, is enraged about the door. Takeshi shows him the death threat video and reveals that he was hired to look into Lauren's death. When Elliot pretends he has no idea, Takeshi points out that the military keeps a record of their weapon serial number. Thus, he knows he's the one on the video. Suddenly, Elliot pulls out his gun and threatens him to leave. When he pulls the trigger, however, the man disappears. Takeshi then pushes a shelf against him and beats him until he knocks Elliot out. Elliot wakes up, tied to a chair, while Takeshi finds a photo of his family, seeing him with a wife and daughter. He figures that his wife, Ava, left, but Elliot clarifies that Ava was arrested for hacking. With that, he figures that Lizzie is his daughter. Suddenly, Takeshi notices a pattern on Elliot's temple. Figuring out what it is, he goes to another room despite Elliot's protests. Inside, he finds a VR system, logs in, and sees a virtual world where he encounters a traumatized Lizzie. Logging out, Takeshi points out that keeping Lizzie's stack in that virtual reality is forcing her into a trauma loop. However, Elliot defends that it's the only way he can see his daughter. She was beaten to death, but her stack remained unharmed. Still, her mind was damaged, and she hadn't said a word since. He reveals that Lizzie told him that she was seeing Lawrence, who promised to take care of her. Noticing his small movements, Takeshi predicts Elliot's actions, so he blocks his attack but still gets pushed back. Elliot breaks the chair, freeing his hand, but his opponent still knocks him out. When Elliot wakes up, the envoy finally concludes that he didn't kill Lawrence, given that if he did, he would have been arrested, leaving Lizzie alone in the virtual reality. With that, he leaves him money for the door before going. Afterward, Takeshi heads to the museum, where he finds the envoys being labeled as murderers. He knows he'll see their history tainted by the Protectorate, but it was a chance to see Colchrist again. He also finds the stacks of his fallen comrades. That night, Kristen returns home to find her mother, Alazny, waiting for her. During dinner, she tries to convince Kristen to join their religion again, but she recounts how when her father died, they couldn't re-sleeve him to ask him what happened. Kristen wonders that they won't re-sleeve her if she dies. Alazny insists that if it happens, she still won't risk Kristen's soul by re-sleeving her. Suddenly, Hawkeye notifies Kristen that Takeshi has moved, so she leaves. Elsewhere, Takeshi finds the same brothel that Lizzie's virtual reality showed him. He pays for a room where a worker named Anemone entertains him. However, when he asks about Lizzie, she threatens to call for help. Thinking quickly, Takeshi pretends to be Ava, who's been re-sleeved to another body for a job. He claims that he's doing the job to get Lizzie a new sleeve, but someone's blocking Lizzie's stack, so he wants to know who killed her. Convinced, Anemone reveals that Lizzie has one sadistic regular. When he sees Anemone's bruises, she waves it off since the client buys the girls upgraded sleeves if he accidentally kills them. Hesitantly, she notes that she wasn't close to Lizzie, but she'll ask the other girls for more information. Sympathizing with her, Takeshi tells Anemone that no matter what the price is, no one should harm her. Moved, Anemone hugs him and reveals that her real name is Alice. As he leaves, he finds Elliot holding him at gunpoint. He questions why he's looking into Lizzie's death, but before Takeshi can explain, two mercenaries attack them. They battle the mercenaries one by one, but Takeshi struggles against his opponent, who's wearing an enhanced spine. As Elliot gets the upper hand on his enemy, Takeshi reveals a knife and punches the power module on his enemy's weapon. He then slashes him and kicks him down. When the fight ends, Kristen holds them under arrest. Knowing the men were after Takeshi, Elliot wonders who he is, but the latter just tells him to escape, so he leaves. With him in custody, Kristen questions why he still works for Lawrence despite knowing his background. Takeshi reveals that he worked for the Protectorate before becoming an envoy. He was good at his job because he was capable of almost anything. She wonders if he's ever thought he'd go too far. Takeshi replies that he'll let her know, but Kristen vows to stop him before then. Soon, Prescott bails him out. As they leave, Kristen wonders about her other case, so she secretly goes to the morgue, where she recovers the supposed missing body of Mary Lou Henchy. Later, Takeshi finds Miriam waiting in his room, hoping to check on his progress. Takeshi coldly tells her that her husband hires women in brothels, but she's aware of this already. She notes that a relationship of over a century is complicated. However, she is confident in her marriage since Lawrence has never had a child with anyone else. As she approaches the envoy, Miriam admires him for his bravery, noting that it's something the world has lost. She wonders if he's had intimacy since being re-sleeved. When he rejects her, she mentions empathin, a biochemical pheromone that connects bodies to feel what each other feels. She secretes this pheromone, and with a kiss, Takeshi is put under her spell. Meanwhile, an undertaker finds Mary Lou's body, but her stack is missing. The stack rests on Kristen's hand at a church, where she confesses how she's taken advantage of her authority. At the hotel, a robotic bug transmits footage of Miriam and Takeshi to an unknown man.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.